What's up guys, my name is Marc Steiner, and today we're going to be talking about the Sony A7C and why it makes no sense. So I've been a Sony shooter for the past 3 years. I started in 2017 when the A7R III came out, and I got it when it was first released, and I was so excited about this camera, and I am just a massive tech nerd in general, and I'm always about that best bang for buck, and I'm so excited about the new cameras. I've already pre-ordered my A7S III, but why am I talking about all this? It's because I think that Sony is the best mirrorless camera company on the market. They're always pushing the bleeding edge. They have pretty aggressive price points for what they're offering. And when the A7 III came out, that was revolutionary. You were getting so many incredible features in this budget entry-level camera, but it wasn't budget at all. It was a fully fledged camera that outcompeted practically everything on the market. And I don't think there's ever been a camera that's had that much of an impact on the camera world like the Sony A7 III. Now, when the rumors first started coming out about the A7C, which was classified as the A5 or A6 before it was officially announced, they were saying it was going to have a pretty aggressive price point, and based off of the leaked specs and whatnot, I assumed that it would be competing with the Canon EOS RP and the Nikon Z5. They're very budget-friendly entry-level camera, and this would kind of be replacing the A7 III / cutting it since it's now 2 years old because it came out early 2018. It's now late 2020, so this camera is more than 2.5 years old, and it's still a great camera, don't get me wrong, but it's 2020, you know, like there are things on the market that beat it in certain categories, and we're expecting the A7 IV to be this awesome camera, which leaves the A7 III in a really good position as a still budget-friendly camera at a very aggressive price point that still outcompetes a lot of the stuff that other people are putting out. So I thought this would be undercutting even that, because we've already seen the Sony A7 III be on discount somewhere between $1,600 and $1,800 depending on where you shop. Usually on the more legit spots it's around $1,800. If you go gray market you can get it for $1,600. But the fact that that amazing camera is at that price point, a lot of people are going to be picking that up when the A7 IV is announced because of that discount. And so that led me to believe that the A7C would be competing with the EOS RP and the Nikon Z5, somewhere between that $900 and $1,600 range. I personally think that the Nikon Z5 is a little bit overpriced for what it is. I think it would be much more comfortable between the $1,000 to maybe $1,300 price point. So I thought that the A7 III would be sitting around this $900 to $1,300 price point, and that would be incredible. It would be a slightly reduced A7 III with more focus on video for 2020, and I think at that price point it would absolutely murder everything else on the market. But the announcement that we got has it as, like, in some ways it's a better than the A7 III, and in others it's crippled, and they kept pushing this massive, oh, it's the smallest full frame camera, it's the smallest full frame camera. And sure, it might be the smallest full frame camera, but it's not the cheapest. Like, the EOS RP exists, and even though in my opinion that's not a good camera, the reason why that camera exists at its aggressive price point, the only thing it really has going for it is that it's a full frame camera. And now this is like pretending to be the body of an A6600 with some A7 III features, with the autofocus system of the A7S III, with the flip screen of the A7S III, but the old menu system, only one SD card slot. So you're gaining some stuff from the newer cameras, and then you're crippling it and taking some stuff away. You don't have those dual card slots, and you're making it less professional. It's this mishmash Frankenstein in a smaller body, and I think it's weird that Sony kept pushing this smaller body thing, because it's not actually that much smaller. They took the EVF from the A7 III, they chopped it off, and they took the EVF from the A6600 and slapped it on the side. And it kind of reminds me more of like an A6000 camera, not the 6600. Like, they're very early, budget-friendly. It doesn't make sense that this camera is sitting at the price point of $1,800. Because for me, the A7 III is already at that price point. And in many ways, the A7 III is better than this. But in some ways, the A7C is better. But I still don't think that justifies the $1,800 price point, especially in 2020. If they released this in 2018, maybe even 2019, I think a lot of people would have gone for this camera, especially the more video-focused people who wanted a smaller and more entry-level camera into the Sony ecosystem and didn't quite want the A7S3, but wanted that flip screen and the awesome video features. But that's not what we got. It's 2020, the A7 IV is right around the corner, we all know it's coming, and the A7S III is already on the market, pre-orders are shipping right now, and I just don't understand where this camera fits in Sony's lineup at that price point. And this is coming from someone who enjoys Sony products, but it doesn't make sense to me how they can have this camera sitting at this price point with such outdated specs. These are 2018 specs that they're selling at practically full price in 2020, and to me that doesn't make sense. It doesn't have 10-bit, it doesn't have the new color science, it doesn't have the new menus. Like, you're not gaining that much in this camera for that price point. So for me, I don't really understand where this sits in Sony's lineup, because when the A7 IV is announced, the A7 III is going to be permanently on that $1,800 discount, if not lower. And then this is sitting above the A7 III, which is technically a better camera, a more professional camera, and that's not that much bigger. Like, Sony cameras were never huge to begin with, so I don't understand why they're saying, oh, it's so small, it's all about that size. It's really not that much smaller than any other full frame camera that Sony already makes. Do I think this camera is worth $1,800? No. I have been telling people to hold off, wait for the A7 IV, and I knew that a budget-friendly camera was coming. I said wait for that camera to be announced because this might be the camera you're looking for. And then the camera was released, and I told them, nah, keep waiting for the A7 IV, this is not the one. And the reason why I said that is because that's not the price point I was expecting. I was expecting between $900 and $1,300, and there, this camera would absolutely thrive and demolish everything else on the market. But for $1,800, you're really not getting your 2020 value worth out of this camera, or 2021. When you're dropping that much cash, this is a camera that should be relatively updated and should last 3 years, no worries. But if you're dropping $1,800 for already outdated tech, that kind of hurts if this is your, big budget spending, this is my first full frame camera, I want to get into the Sony full frame ecosystem, and it's already a disappointment in my personal opinion. So, and the A7 IV is not going to be that much more expensive, right? Like, maybe. Because since the A7 III was released at the price point of $2,000, which was super aggressive, it kind of put all these mirrorless cameras out to shame because of that $2,000 price point. That's one of the reasons why the A7 III was so successful. And I assume in 2020 and 2021, we're gonna see that price rise. I assume somewhere between $2,200, maybe $2,500, something competing more with the R6 price point, maybe a little more aggressive, a little bit cheaper, because Sony tends to undercut the competition while adding more features. So if we're looking at a price point between $2,200 and $2,600, $2,500 for the A7 IV, the A7 III is $1,800, the A7C is $1,800. I really just can't recommend people buy this camera unless you are in this very specific niche of maybe the YouTube community, maybe you want that vlog life, then maybe the A7C makes sense. But even then, at that price point of $1,800, I still don't feel like it's worth it. So I really don't understand how this camera exists. I personally am a bit disappointed with this because it's not what I was expecting, and it's unlike Sony to release a product, in my opinion, that kind of really misses the mark on this one, especially with all their new cameras coming out. They've been absolutely killing it with the A7S III and the upcoming A7 IV, which I think will be amazing. Another thing that irks me about Sony pushing this small compact camera, which it isn't because they just chopped off the EVF, and they took away all the custom function buttons, and they took away the joystick, so in my opinion, the usability of this camera just decreases incredibly because the other ones have these amazing features that just make your life easier. But aside from this massive size difference that really doesn't exist, when you start adding good glass to your camera, now you have this small camera with really long glass that looks really out of place. And Sony cameras have always had this problem that they're super front heavy with practically any lens because they're small cameras. So this one being even smaller has that issue even more. And I feel like so many people were saying, oh, with this tiny small camera, no one's going to kick me out of places, they're not going to question what I'm doing, it doesn't look like a professional camera. But if you have a 70-200 or a 24-70 or really any lens that's not the 20mm 1.8 or the 35 1.8, I think most people are going to assume that you have a professional camera when the lens looks relatively big. I don't really care how big the body is. If you have a long lens, people are going to notice in public, and you're still going to get those, hey, what are you doing here? You can't be here. Do you have a permit? Kind of consultations with people. So for me, this camera really just doesn't make sense. I can't recommend this camera. I won't be picking this camera up unless we see a drastic price shift happen in the not so distant future. If this camera starts going for $1,500 and under, I think that's worth it. And what I think Sony is attempting to do is kind of kill off the APS-C line. Now, why might Sony be killing off the APS-C line? If they can get a full frame camera practically the size of an APS-C camera, they're going to do it. Why not? You get better image quality, all the benefits of full frame, you can charge a little bit more for that. It makes sense for them to do that. The reason why full frame cameras are on this lofty, pedestal is because they're the professional standard. This is the sensor size that pros use. And APS-C was always the budget camera, the sub $700 cameras that got the job done if you were getting into photography for the first time. The sensors were cheaper to make, they were smaller, and they usually skimped out on the bodies because they weren't pro bodies. But now, in 2020, APS-C sensors are not really competing with your smartphone, these APS-C sensors are not that much better, especially on the lower end, where around the $500, $600 range, smartphones are kind of out competing most of those cameras, and a lot of people aren't buying into that $500, $600 range anymore because smartphone cameras have just gotten so good. And on the manufacturing side of things, building full frame sensors has actually come down a lot in price, which is another reason why the A7 III was priced so aggressively, is because full frame cameras are not as expensive to make as they used to be. There used to be this huge dispersion between APS-C and full frame, and now they're about the same cost to produce. It's not this massive gap like we had before. They've streamlined processes, material costs have come down, and they know what they're doing when it comes to full frame sensors. And Sony is the leader, the world leader in producing sensors. So full frame sensors for them isn't that big of a deal. So why not kill off the APS-C line with an APS-C like full frame camera? That starts making more sense to me. But again, at the $1,800 price point, it's not a viable option. I think they need to come out with cheaper options, and I don't know how they're going to do that now that they come out with this camera, but they need to come out with something cheaper, or at least cut the price of this in order to make it a viable option. Because right now, its main competition is the A7 III, and I think most people would still pick up the A7 III instead of the A7C. But I want to know what you guys think. Are you excited about this camera? Have you pre-ordered it? Are you in the same camp that I am, that this doesn't make sense at the $1,800 price point and would make much more sense at the $900 to $1,300 price point? I would love to know what you guys think in the comment section down below. My name is Marc Steiner, and I'll see you next time.